Okay, today we're going to be talking about polynomials, and more specifically adding, subtracting, and multiplying them. A lot of this we've kind of already done really from the beginning of the year, but we are going to be taking it to a new place. And we are continuing Unit 6, so we are going to be applying some of the properties of exponents that we talked about and that we did. But let's go ahead and dive into this fairly quickly. So let's talk about distributing and combining like terms. This is the same thing that we've been doing, although remember, for like terms, the variables and their exponents have to be identical. So we just look at these two. These are not like terms because the variables and exponents are not identical. They both have an x squared. They both have a y, but this one doesn't have a y squared and this one doesn't have a z. So all of these things would have to be identical in both of them for them to be like terms. So we'll talk more about that in just a second. So whenever we have a minus sign outside of parentheses, we have to distribute. So let's distribute the minus sign. When we do that, we're going to get negative 7 x squared y squared z minus 3x squared y. So we just dropped the first parentheses, but now we're going to do the distributive part. So this is going to be minus 2x squared y squared z. And then negative minus negative 3 becomes plus 3. So again, this is all stuff we've done before. We haven't done it with quite this extensive variables in a long time. When we first did it, we did. But most of it will be simple. And most of what we do is going to be fairly straightforward too. But you still need to be able to see and understand this. So now the next thing we're going to do here is we are going to combine like terms. Now when we combine our like terms, remember the variables and their exponents have to be identical. So if we look at this one right here, not the number in front, but the variables and their exponent, we have an x squared, a y squared, and a z. Way over here, we have an x squared, a y squared, and a z. So these are like terms. Now, this has an x squared and a y, so why isn't it a like term? Yes, that's correct, because this would have to have a y squared and a z, which it doesn't have. So these are the only two like terms. Now, just to remind you also, whenever you're combining like terms, you only add the coefficients, the numbers in front. So we have a negative 7 and a negative 2. Negative 7 and negative 2 is negative 9. And then bring all those down, x squared, y squared, z. And when you're adding, the variables and their exponents do not change. So here we have minus 3x squared y. Doesn't have a like term, so we need to make sure that we bring that down. Minus 3x squared y. We also have a 3 over here, where again, doesn't have a like term, so just plus 3. You have to make sure that you bring it down. And so that is as simplified as it can get. So I do want you to remember to write things in standard form. With more complicated ones like this particular example, we'll talk more about what exactly standard form is a little bit later. But basically, you put your variables in alphabetical order and make sure that your variables that the exponents on those variables are descending. And as I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more in class. So that's using the distributive property and combining like terms. So for the next part, we're multiplying polynomials. So we have a monomial and a polynomial. Now this is something that, again, we've done since the very beginning of school. So we're going to distribute our 3. 3 times 2x squared is 6x squared. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12x. And 3 times 3 is plus 9. So we have done a lot of that this year. So that still hasn't changed at all. But in this next example, now we have a variable. We have variables out here as well. And so how does that affect our exponents? This is where we're going to pull in the exponent properties. So let's just start distributing. It's 4x squared times 3x squared. 3 times 4 is 12. And x squared times x squared. When we multiply like bases, we add the exponents. 2 plus 2 is 4. So x to the 4th. Minus. Now we have to multiply this to the minus x term. It's understood to be a 1, so 4 times 1 is 4. Don't forget it's a minus 4. Now this is where it throws some students off, because what's the exponent understood on this x right here in the middle? It's a 1. When we multiply like bases, we add the exponents. 2 plus 1 is 3, so that's going to be x cubed. This is going to become second nature, but right now just make sure you're careful with it and do it properly. And then we have 4x squared plus 5 times 5. 4 times 5 is 20, so it's going to be a plus 20. Then the x squared, since there's just the one variable, bring it on over. Make sure you bring the squared as well. Now, remember, if it's positive, you put a plus. If it's negative, you put a minus when you're doing this type of thing, when you're multiplying and distributing. So, any questions about that, please let me know or go back over this. I'm going to go ahead and add one more problem that I did in only one class today. But there were enough questions that made me think, oh, wait a minute, I need to add this to this. And so let's have this be example 2b. And I'm going to have this be 4x squared y times x cubed y squared minus 2x squared y squared plus 5y. Okay, so now when we do this, we are distributing still, so it's the same idea. So there's a 1 understood in front of the x cubed y squared, so 4 times 1 is 4. X squared times x to the 3rd is x to the 5th. Now what exponent's understood on this y right here in the front? It's a 1. And then we multiply like bases, we add. So 1 plus 2 is 3. So that becomes y cubed. Then let's distribute to the next one. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. X squared times x squared, we add the exponents. That's going to be x to the 4th. Y to the 1 times y squared is going to be y cubed, so that's going to be y cubed. One part at a time. Now let's go back here to the 5y and multiply it. 4 times 5 is 20. Now this one doesn't have an x, but I want you to go ahead and keep your variables in alphabetical order. So let's go ahead and bring the x squared that was in the front, still comes over here. Then we have our y times y. Y times y is y squared. And there you go for that part. Okay, now when your parents think of Algebra 1, this is one of the two things that they think about. The other two main, the second or the first of the main things that they think about we'll do next week, and that is when we start factoring. But for today, let's talk about just using the distributive property when we have